Thank you so much. Now I will transfer this microphone to Mrs. Manjula Tekal, who would discuss Sridharji's lecture and ask questions if she wants, because that's what Sridharji is all about. Ask questions. Manjula Tekal.
Thank you, Professor Sridhar. Thank you, Professor Rajeshwari Pandri Pandit. It's a privilege to participate in this program honoring the memory of the Kacharus, Professor Braj and Yamuna Kacharu. It was a privilege to listen to you, Professor Sridhar. I learned a lot, and it's an honor to summarize and highlight some of the discussion points here. So I'll jump right into it and then get started basically with a tribute to the Kacharus with Guru Bhyo Namaha. So Professor Sridhar characterizes the Kacharus as, I'll go with the discussion, the way it went. He characterizes the Kacharus as embodying the values of Hinduism. He enumerated the values of they held dear and they lived throughout their life. The first was equanimity and contentment, the quality of being a sthita prajna. The Kacharus were very hardworking and followed the path of karma yoga. Professor Sridhar cites many examples of karma yogins like Madhur Chennaiya, who exemplified the importance of professional identity as central to one's psychological and social identity. He also said that Gita redefines karma to reconcile worldly encouragement, that is pravritti, engagement, worldly engagement, that is pravritti, and detachment, which is nivritti, through work. Are you hearing some kind of a feedback? Sorry. The Kacharus were extremely devoted to their profession. Their view of karma was not exactly ritualistic, but more like the Veerashaiva model of dedication to their profession and work. Their professional identity was a reflection of their social identity. They were extremely proud of their Indian identity and their work. Their identity was directed by their conception of Upanishadic spiritual thought and the idea of karma. The second value that they held dear was respect for elders, learning and tradition. The Kacharus respected age and experience. They honored scholars. They fostered many productive and influential students with affection. And they held pluralism very dear. They respected their Hindu/Indian identity and culture because of its inherent pluralism. Professor Sridhar puts it very charmingly when he was speaking to me once. He said, anyone imposing one standard framework to replace diversity have failed. Instead, he must let 1,000 failures bloom. They have done extensive work on multilingualism. Professor Sridhar quoted many examples, including Kaviraja Marga, and talked about many different Kannadas even within the language. The Vachanakaras worshipped their own Ishtadevata, like there was not even a concept of one god, so we can worship whoever we want. So there is pluralism to that extent. Kacharus opposed Hindi imposition and opined that all regional languages must flourish. They opposed a uniform English and argued that Indian English was a legitimate form of English. They led the charge towards changing the attitude towards Indian English. They said, Indian English is a product of Indian culture. The words used reflect a certain culture. For example, we use blessings instead of thanks. They thought a universal standard for English is absurd, And there are many variations, flavors of English, such as the Singapore English and the Nigerian, the Ugandan, etc. So their pluralistic Hindu upbringing and ethos was reflected in their professional credo. National pride, the Kacharus bristled at the superficial criticism of India and aggressively and forcefully defended India against hypocrisy and double standards. Hindus need enormous pride and self-confidence to counter this criticism. We are not aware of our own tradition. We must develop an in-depth knowledge of Hinduism. We must develop a strong sense of history. Hindus have a long and rich, if tumultuous and sometimes troublesome history. And they were champions of a historical sense. The Kacharus were champions of a historical sense. Historically, our languages have evolved by borrowing words and expressions from each other, especially Sanskrit, right from the Vedic times. This evolution of quote-unquote code mixing is a manifestation of language evolution in itself. And as you know, Professor Sridhar has already told you, Professor Kacharu wrote the history of Kashmiri literature. Professor Sridhar went on to analyze Hinduism first by defining it and tracing its evolution through its many influencing factors, then finally making sense of what Hinduism is for the Indian diaspora in America. First, he went over the Indian cultural experiment in the colonial and post-colonial era. He talked about the three revolutions, the political revolution, the economic revolution, and the social justice revolution. He spoke about the Gandhian experiment, pluralism and sustainability, an effort to restore cultural identity, which has taken a dent during the Islamic and colonial rule, which has largely been successful. In the contemporary context, Professor Sridhar says Hinduism is going through an identity crisis because of the many controversies targeting Hindus in India. On the other hand, outside India, the younger generations have to view and interpret the news coming their way and come to terms with their Hindu identity in a society that has limited understanding of Hinduism and even viewed through a lens of negative and comical stereotypes. In my opinion, this is the most trenchant, most important question that has been raised today. Because the youngsters have to actually go through this particular thing of they have to own their own culture. On the other hand, they are a minority, and then they are viewing their own culture through an external lens. And that is the most important problem that youngsters are supposed to navigate, and that is the most challenging, the most important question of today. And as Professor Sridhar said, a tradition must be judged by its best exemplars. He went through a whole slew of points where Hinduism is very strong. I mean, how inclusive we are, and how pluralist, how much intellectual depth and richness we have, our philosophical achievements, ethical sophistication based on philosophical precepts like you see God in everyone and treat everyone as a God. Namaste. So Professor Sridhar further enumerates the best exemplars of Hinduism, such as its rich and beautiful mythology, art, architecture, literature, powerful storytelling, its very rich and tumultuous history, its remarkable resilience in surviving foreign onslaughts, and its sheer humanity, the ability to relate to God as a child, lover, friend, parent, and a protector. Hindu identity in the USA, what exactly does it mean to be a Hindu here in the US? What should our young adults believe and own as a part of their Hindu identity and ethos? Professor Sridhar has discussed a spiritual, practical Hinduism as opposed to the ritualistic. We have the following features of Hinduism that lends itself to fluid and prideful adaptation by the young people of the diaspora. Hinduism has never been against science and easily lends itself to Western scientific education without any problems at all. There is a long line of modern seers from Vivekananda and Ramana Maharshi to B.K. Iyengar and Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Yoga is mainstream, so we have a lot of advantages as well, not just the difficulties. So the choice is what kind of Hinduism? Institutional versus folk, temple art versus folk art, and caste divisions, etc. So Professor Sridhar went through all these schisms in a way, and he offers an example of the Kacharus themselves, who were staunch Hindus but were never ritualistic. He draws a parallel with Kumaravyasa also, who transcended sectarianism. Kumaravyasa was a great devotee of Krishna and also of Shiva. He was critical of pseudo scholars and rejected established religion poetics. And he offered several other examples of fluidity, like Bittideva, which a Jain who became a Vaishnava under the tutelage of Ramanuja. Finally, he offered many solutions to foster a strong Hindu identity. Hindu temples and centers for India studies must strengthen our pride in our identity. They must create authentic knowledge, foster research, courses, institutes, scholarships, lecture series, conferences, etc. They must be authentic but accessible. We must make it easy by communicating in English. The Indian languages can be used as second languages. Yeah, I am a very great proponent of translation, so I'm totally one with this goal. We must involve the high school and college kids, encourage critical thinking, for example, feature book and film discussions by students at cultural events. We must educate the mainstream about true Hinduism and create an environment in which younger people would feel proud to call themselves Hindus. We must encourage music and the arts. I think we are doing a lot of this, but there is a certain, perhaps a strategy that needs to strengthen in all our efforts to do these things. And I hope we'll hit all the goals here. Thank you. I hope I have hit all the highlights. I don't have that many questions, I guess. I enjoyed the talk immensely, and so here is my summary. Thanks again.
Thank you, Manjula, immensely. Thank you. She has so succinctly summarized the major points. Manjula is a gem in our community. We are very proud of her. She is a creative writer herself and thinks about Hinduism in many different creative ways. One of the ways she expresses her views of Hinduism is through translation. So that is one of the things that she never mentions about herself because of her humility. I thought I should mention it for sure.